Hi everyone, my name is Luiz Bispo, and it's a pleasure to be here with so many interesting people and people full of knowledge, and we have four amazing guest speakers here. So this online event is being recorded, and it will be uploaded in our WCAA YouTube channel and website, and it will be an educational material available for public use and dissemination. Before we start this meeting, I would like to do the acknowledge of country. We are hosting this event from Sydney, Australia, and we respect and honor Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders elders, past, present, and future. We acknowledge the stories, traditions, and living cultures of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people on this land and commit to building a brighter future together. As I said, I'm Luiz Bispo, and I'm the facilitator of this event. I'm a world citizen, and I'm a world federalist as well. I strongly support the World Citizens Association of Australia and the World Federalist Movement Institute for Global Policy, known as WFM. Each guest speaker will have 7 to 10 minutes to deliver their message. At the end, we will have a question and answers short session. We have here a group of amazing speakers, as I said, experts in their own field, who will deliver a taster. Who will deliver a taster of ways to achieve world peace. It's a super important theme nowadays, and it can be divided in so many other topics. Today, we will not have an in-depth discussion, but a thought-provoking short presentation delivered by our four guest speakers. They are Dr. Daryl Le Cornu, talking on abolishing nuclear weapons, Dr. Maja Groff, talking on international law for Earth system governance, Dr. Richard Mochelle, talking on global responsibility and world constitution building, and Peter Davidse, talking on overcoming poverty. So let's get started. The first speaker is going to be Dr. Le Cornu. Dr. Le Cornu will be talking on abolishing nuclear weapons. He has had many years' experience teaching history and legal studies in state school in New South Wales. His last position in the New South Wales Department of Education was as Senior Curriculum Officer for History at the Curriculum Directory. As a high school teacher, Daryl was a passionate supporter of student-led human rights groups. Daryl is an author of the Cambridge Legal Studies textbooks for the preliminary and HSC courses. His main area of interest are peace groups in World War I, contemporary history, human rights, international law, world order, global governance, and geopolitics. He is committed to teaching high school students. So there, I'll give the floor to you, and thank you so much again.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here amongst all of you tonight and to talk about some very important issues relating to our world today. And I'm going to be talking about nuclear weapons and how to get rid of them. And to do that, I'm going to go to screen share and just see if that works. So, ways to achieve world peace. There are many ways to achieve world peace and many areas to work in. And the one I'm talking about here is nuclear weapons, eliminating nuclear weapons. Uh, and this has been something that people have been trying to do since they were created in 1945 with the first test, Trinity test, and even many of the scientists that worked on developing those weapons at the Manhattan Project had turned against it and warned that this would lead to a nuclear arms race. And that movement has gone on decade after decade in different stages over the last 80 years. This photo was taken outside Australia's Parliament House in Canberra. It was taken on the 22nd of January 2021. And that was when this treaty that I'm going to talk about came into force under international law, as enough countries had um, signed and ratified it. Now, many of you are familiar with this graph, this sort of graph showing the growth of nuclear weapons in the Cold War between the USSR and Russia and United States, and um, and how it peaked in the 1980s to absurdly high levels. They had enough weapons that could destroy the world many times over, and it was uh, it had just become a really massive concern globally in the 1980s. By about in the early 1980s, there was a massive international uh, nuclear disarmament movement across many countries in the world, including on the other side of the old Iron Curtain in communist countries. But the interesting thing is that it peaked in the mid 1980s and then it starts going down. And till we get down to a much lower figure, around about 12,000 or so today. And so the question is, why did that happen? Well, I guess we know the answer, and that is something happened at this point in the nuclear arms race. And that was this meeting between Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev. And I really love this photo because it's this photo at the Geneva summit, at the end of the summit, which looked like it would be a failure because they kept arguing about everything. And then their minders sort of put them together in front of a fireplace and they started talking like friends. And they loosened up and they came out of that summit with this slogan that a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. And that was a pivotal moment in the last 80 years. If we look at this in terms of the dates, so it's 1985. So 80 years between 1945 to now, at the halfway point, I guess we could say that the world reached a point of realization that we could not live with these nuclear weapons. We could not live with such an arms race. And the two leaders of the superpowers decided that they would do something about it and dramatically change that situation. And we're now 40 years on from that. And we saw from the graph how the weapons went down and went down to much uh, uh, more satisfactory levels, I suppose, even though what what it's come down to now, 12,000 nuclear weapons. Well, the world could still be basically destroyed and civilization could be destroyed by using a fraction of those weapons. So we have this 40 years between these two. So what's happened in this second half? Really, we should have been on a trajectory to get down to zero nuclear weapons into the early 2000s. And Gorbachev actually put a proposal to Reagan to work towards that, which unfortunately he rejected. Uh, and Um, and what's happened in this time is that
Another person speaking. That's all. You can look. Oh, you've got
and what has happened is a number of treaties were signed, which you'd be familiar with those treaties, the INF Treaty and others, which radically brought down the number of nuclear weapons and dramatically shifted that curve on the arms race, the number of missiles in existence, and so on. But something else occurred midway between this, and it's 20 years on from 85, and so it's midway between this 40-year period. Something else happened. Um, Something which should have actually led to, I guess, putting the nail in the coffin of nuclear weapons and really getting down to eliminating them. And that was the nuclear NPT review conference, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Conference review conference in 2005. And basically, what had happened here is that the United States and the other nuclear powers following on decided that they basically weren't going to really do anything. They said that they would implement certain steps to eliminate nuclear weapons, but were not serious about it. And it's at that point that many nuclear groups around the world, anti-nuclear groups that have been on this case for decades, in frustration, decided that they had to work outside of this nuclear non-proliferation treaty framework. And they decided that they would create a new organization called the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. This was modeled on the campaign to abolish landmines, which led to the Ottawa Convention. And so it's a similar approach. Instead of starting a brand new organization, they started a campaign. Now, as many of you know, ICAN started in Australia by a handful of people in Melbourne, and the idea started there. They took it then to Geneva, where other nuclear disarmament groups met, and there they created ICAN International. So there's ICAN International with a Geneva base and a governance based in Geneva and so on. And then after 10 years, to make a long story short, we had a treaty out of that process. The Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons was created. This photo is from 2010, a board meeting in Melbourne. There's about 5 people, no, 6 or 7 people in that photo that were those originals. Not all of them, there are a few others that created this organization in 2007. Now, another thing that happened around about 2011 or so was the humanitarian initiative, which was championed by the Red Cross. There was a program called Make Nuclear Weapons the Target, and the Red Cross came on board and also started pushing towards the elimination of nuclear weapons. Now, this is a slide that I use with students because they use this in legal studies as a kind of a case study of how international law is created. So what we've had so far is the ICAN created, starts in Melbourne, then goes to Geneva, 2007. The Red Cross coming in with their resolution on humanitarian initiative, and this led to a number of nation states then taking the lead. We had Norway, Mexico, and then Austria taking the lead in running conferences involving diplomats from all the countries in the world that, well, not all of them, but most of them. The last one, Vienna, had about 258, I think, countries. 258, no, I'm getting my figures wrong. That they had the vast majority of countries there in that last one. And these 3 conferences then led to a resolution, which led to a UN working group, which led to further work at the UN, and the treaty was created, the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, or TPNW for short. And that's the legal outcome of this. And that's the day, the minute, if you like, that the treaty was passed, voted on, and created. So we have this treaty. It came into force in January 2021, and there are now 94 signatories. So we're approaching half the countries in the world, and 73 states parties. And the states parties take part in the meetings of states parties, of which there have been 3 over the last 3 years, in which all the countries of the states parties get together to work on promoting the treaty and doing a number of the things in the treaty, as well as getting other countries to sign on. But there's other things in there as well in terms of remediation of the environment, helping victims, and so on. And the treaty is basically about the catastrophic human consequences, the existential risk posed by nuclear war, and the implications for human survival and the environment. A nuclear war, even a very small scale nuclear war, would be catastrophic for the climate. So the TPNW is international law. It's embedded in the United Nations. It's compatible with the other treaties, the Non-Proliferation Treaty and the CTBT. It's evidence-based. It's based on the impact of nuclear testing, the victims, the survivors, and scenarios of what could happen if things went wrong. It's also based on the lessons of history, the close calls that have occurred and what we can learn from those, and also the nuclear disarmament movement that worked decade after decade against these weapons. It also fosters international cooperation. So those nearly 100 countries involved are all talking to each other. They're taking part in conferences with each other. They're working together. And if we got to the point of elimination of nuclear weapons, this will release a lot of money that could then go to much better things instead of wasting on weapons which we cannot afford to actually use. But the 80 years since Hiroshima, we know that there are big problems, and proliferation is going to increase as the international order breaks down under the Trump onslaught, and there's going to be big issues there. The prospect of the Euro bomb, the European Union, looking at having a nuclear arsenal and all this sort of thing. So this is not a good scenario. Nevertheless, there is a choice, and there's always a choice. At each of those points in the last 80 years, back in 1945, there was a choice that could have been taken on this. 1985, there was a choice, and I think they took the right choice there. But today, in 2025, we now have a choice between going down the path provided by this treaty towards a sustainable future, and those of us who believe in that need to redouble our efforts to use this treaty to stigmatize these weapons. We need to convince the governments, our leaders of governments, to commit to the elimination of these weapons. The Australian Labor Party has committed to signing and ratifying this treaty, and they need to be held to account to do that in their second term if they happen to win government, either as a majority or a minority. And we need to educate the general public so that they can put pressure on their governments on this issue. So that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daryl. Great food for thought. A lot of information, and it's very impressive, everything that you shared with us. So thank you again. Yeah, I totally agree with you a few times, and I also agree that we will never achieve peace if we continue to have this nuclear weapons race. And I agree when Reagan and Gorbachev in 85, they said nuclear war cannot be won. It would be a catastrophe, like for human beings and for life on Earth, for everything. If we see some pictures from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it's just horrendous, all of those photos. So yeah. So let's move on. Thank you again, Dario. Let's move on to the next guest speaker, Maja Groff, Dr. Maja Groff. She is the chair of the Planetary Governance Program at the New Institute and the the convener of the Climate Governance Commission, which has proposed high-impact global governance innovations adequate to meet the climate challenge. As a principal legal officer, she has previously worked on the development and administration of multiple multilateral treaties, as well as at the international criminal tribunals. She has taught at the Hague Academy of International Law and was a visiting professor at Leiden University Faculty of Governance and Global Affairs. So I'll give the floor to you, Maja. Thank you so much for participating in this event.
Thank you so much, Luiz. And can everyone see my PowerPoint okay? Yes, it's the right
Yes.
screen sharing. Fantastic. So wonderful to be here with all of you. And thanks to Daryl for that great introductory presentation. And it's really important to connect the different international risks that are materializing, or sometimes it goes through the cycles of political commitment, as Daryl was mentioning, just so we know as citizens on the planet at the moment, are converging international risks and challenges. Some have noted this time as a time of polycrisis, or even that we're on a precipice as an international community, that we really have to get our heads around the different international risks that we're facing, which also represent really important opportunities for the international community. So, as Luiz mentioned, I'm chairing a planetary governance program currently at the New Institute, which is helping to further the implementation of key proposals of the Climate Governance Commission. So I'll just tell you a little bit about the background in my presentation, and hopefully we'll have time also for discussion at the end. I'll try to keep it short. So the Climate Governance Commission is co-chaired by Mary Robinson of the Elders, Maria Fernanda Espinosa, former president of the General Assembly, and Jan Rockström, leading planetary scientist, also as a co-chair, amongst many other former heads of state, leaders of international organizations, prominent policy makers and thinkers around the world, really across regions. And the reason why all of these commissioners, accepted to become part of this effort to look at our international governance for Earth system and ecological challenges is indeed because of this crossroads that we're at as an international community. This is from the UN Secretary General back in 2021. We're at an inflection point in history. And he's suggesting we need to find, the various breakthroughs if we're going to avoid breakdown. And from our perspective, this international governance lens is one of the really key breakthroughs that we need. So hopefully you're all familiar with the very alarming climate science and developments, with 2024 being the first year where the 1.5 degree target was pushed through. It might, of course, be temporary, but we're really on the trajectory to very dangerous levels of warming. And that's not all. Climate is one of the identified planetary boundaries that scientists have shared this planetary boundaries framework with us, but we've already overstepped 6 of 9 of the planetary boundaries. And in the Climate Governance Commission, we've moved and evolved our perspective to move away from just thinking about climate change in a siloed fashion to really, we need the proper international systems and at all levels of governance, of course, to manage the full planetary boundary range. Because we're not, for example, with climate, we need to manage other specific planetary boundaries very actively in order to manage our climate challenges, et cetera. And there's been more and more recent reports about the economic effects of our current ecological trajectories. This is from Potsdam Institute, published in Nature. GDP damage, an average of about 19% by I believe this was by 2050, even more dire predictions by actuaries on a slightly greater time horizon, 50%, up to 50% GDP collapse. And this is, this is based on an actual analysis of the data. Major leaders in the insurance industry also noting that they're very concerned about general economic collapse. For example, when there's a crisis in the insurance industry, we can no longer insure because of the effects of climate change, et cetera. So these are, again, these systemic converging risks that we're grappling with. So the Climate Governance Commission, we're trying to do, thought leadership, norm entrepreneurship, as well as very concrete proposals to help to raise awareness about the planetary Earth system, the way it functions. This is a slide from our friends at the Common Home for Humanity, and they've suggested that these common Earth system software, so to speak, the climate, all of those big biophysical systems, we should consider that as common heritage that we need to manage together. So we need the new legal and governance approaches to recognize that, really vital, urgent awareness based on the latest science. Also, tipping points science, that I hope you're somewhat aware of, that shows how the big biophysical systems around the world that regulate climate and keeping a stable Earth system, keeping humanity in a safe operating space, they are interdependent. So this also really necessitates taking this international governance lens very seriously, that these are interconnected systems around the world, like the Amazon, like the Arctic and Antarctic, Greenland ice sheets, et cetera, that are really interdependent in ensuring a safe operating space for humanity. In terms of our current governance architecture, it's very fragmented and really lacks effective implementation enforcement mechanisms. We have hundreds, if not thousands, of multilateral and bilateral environmental agreements. So we had identified in an early interim report, a policy gap across countries, but also this very important governance gap. These are just a few of our early reports trying to take this innovative thinking about governance, is trying to elevate this perspective, taking this international governance lens and international cooperation lens much more seriously than we have. These are all available online. And then we launched before COP28 in late 2023, this report from the Climate Governance Commission with firstly, a top 10 near-term governance innovation proposals. And again, this is in the report, it's all available online. And then medium-term proposals, what are the next generation global governance architectural proposals that we need? For example, a Global Environment Agency, International Court for the Environment, and I'll say more about some of our prioritized proposals in a moment. And then secondly, very importantly, we've been at the same time establishing a smart coalition implementation advocacy platform called the Mobilizing an Earth Governance Alliance, which indeed seeks to replicate efforts, really successful efforts like ICANN and others, Coalition for an International Criminal Court, which was really dramatically successful. To really use this kind of smart coalition approach to accelerate and implement various really vital international ecological governance proposals. So I'll just speed through these just in the interest of time. We're looking at Earth system governance, which is this shifted paradigm. Rather than sovereignty looking up, we need to take the whole Earth system as a whole and really make sure our governance institutions are tailored to that reality. We need to have adaptive governance sort of approaches as conditions are accelerating in terms of, and the ecological complexity and complexity of our various systems, including governance systems. We need to think in that different way. So just to round out a few of our priority proposals, we're working with the Club of Rome on climate COP reform to make science really at the core of COP processes and a really focused approach to implementation, and also addressing various conflicts of interest. We're exploring with partners a potential international policy clearinghouse innovation hub facility. Also working on a potential General Assembly resolution on Earth system risks that are unprecedented, advocating for the Secretary General's proposed emergency platform to be convened for planetary emergency, and also really trying to emphasize and work concretely on a new body for full Earth system risk assessment and monitoring for states. And then, as I mentioned earlier, Global Environment Agency, how do we strengthen and upgrade UNEP, make sure it has adequate learning and also reflexivity functionality. So again, it's like this adaptive governance sort of approach where our key institutions are constantly learning and working from the best available knowledge. And by the way, Angela Merkel and Nicolas Sarkozy proposed such a global environment agency back in 2009. So these aren't new ideas. They just haven't had the smart coalition kind of push and impetus behind them in many respects. And another one of those proposals is an international court for the environment, which we've started to work on more seriously. So this is just the package of the priority proposals that we're actively working on. I've mentioned most of them. And just one I'll mention, which is sort of a cross-cutting international governance reform. I've written a number of papers on an international rule of law enhancement or reform package. For example, the International Court of Justice hasn't been reformed in 80 years. It also does not have mandatory jurisdiction for members of the UN. So sort of those sorts of bits of international homework can help the whole system and indeed create the conditions for a durable international peace. So these ecological challenges, which are coming down the pipeline, are absolutely fundamental for international peace. But then all of the adjacent issues in the international system need to be thought through as well, and our key institutions likely need to be upgraded to ensure we can get through the challenges of the 21st century. So I'll stop there, and thank you so much.
Awesome, Maja. Thank you so much again. I really like when you said about topics are interdependent, and I also liked when you said about giving more importance to science and considering science as the basis of a lot of decision making. Interdependence, everything's connected. If carbon dioxide is a big problem, if, for example, if they are released to the atmosphere, there might be less accessible water or less food for people to eat. Poverty might accelerate. So it's everything interconnected, and the climate plays such a crucial role in keeping peace, and that's the theme of our event here: ways to achieve global peace. And it's a taster. But we can further discuss in the future. So let's move on to the next speaker here. The next speaker is Dr. Richard Mochelle. He has explored the transformative implications of global responsibility for integrity and global order. He subsequently conducted several he developed constitutional deliberation experiments. This spawned his current Cosmopol project, a multi-component plan centrally featuring the design of an unprecedented online platform enabling cosmopolities to coalesce, constitute, and experimentally develop cosmopolitan civilizations. So I'm gonna pass the floor to you, Dr. Richard Mochelle. Thank you so much.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Right, okay. In In the few minutes given to me, I'll just want to briefly introduce the Cosmopol project. It's a grand action planning project I've been conceiving in response to the call for global responsibility. Echoing the two-stage revolutionary founding of the US, the plan is to orchestrate worldwide cosmopolitan declaration events that will see declarants commit to global impartiality, withdraw their consent for national sovereignty and the UN system, push for disarmament, and proceed to engage in web-mediated cosmopolitan constitution building. The project's concept development needs passing now to a multidisciplinary team to progress it. I've been working on my own for these last 3 decades, and it's got to a stage where I need to pass it on. I can't here present the entire plan and its many sub-projects. This could take a couple of hours. I'll just need briefly focus on the project's ethical footings and give glimpses of the main strategies. The project arose from my doctoral inquiry begun 3 decades ago into the call for global responsibility by the Commission on Global Governance. Its 1995 report, called Our Global Neighbourhood, assessed the worsening global predicament and offered correctives. Its foremost recommendation was radical, that each of us, leaders first, adopt a global civic ethic, a set of globally protective responsibilities. Was this achievable? While skeptical, given human limitations, I agreed with the ethical advice. So quelling my doubts, I chose the ethical road less travelled to see where it might lead, to explore the implications for personal integrity and world order. First question, if we accept global responsibility in principle, what ought we do as a next step, as a first act of global responsibility? The answer should be obvious. Figure out the global responsibilities we should enact. But this is no simple task. A big learning journey awaits us. We need to consider history's awful lessons, the root causes of the harms and their prevention, and the implications of public adoption of corrective responsibility on world systems and personal integrity. What would a world future political economy look like if most of us committed to enact a set of global responsibilities? What would we continue tacitly consenting to the current international military order? I doubt it somehow. Toward a fuzzy cosmopolitan horizon beyond their experience, whose features will become clearer, consistently steering toward it. It helps to ask, what might education and parenting look like if we all committed to global responsibility? Could global responsibility be instilled in the world's children without indoctrinating them, without colonizing their minds, as we've been doing? Could our children be enabled to think post-conventionally, to exercise moral autonomy, decide their ethical principles as Immanuel Kant prescribed in his formulations of the categorical imperative? What is the categorical imperative? Well, it's similar to the golden rule. The imperative asks that we act with integrity, in accord with self-chosen principles we believe everyone should enact to protect common interests. It doesn't tell us what principles to adopt. The choice is up to us. With Kant, I view it as the supreme principle of global ethical responsibility. It's a safeguard, in effect, against moral indoctrination, be it religious, moral, political, economic, or ethnic. It implicitly places the responsibility on parents and teachers to guide the world's youngsters to gradually attain moral autonomy, to self-determine the global responsibilities they believe should be enacted in their future world. Given autonomous agency, would we choose to be segregated into sovereign military encampments, as has been the global tradition, to be identity branded and allegiance bound, to see our youth trained to serve as mass killers, to defend us against segregated youth trained likewise across the border? A research goal of the Cosmopol project is to find out and make the findings public. While we tacitly consent to the divisive norm of national sovereignty and impose it on each other, we deny ourselves the ethical right to be globally impartial. It compels us to be partial, to participate in the deceptive and potentially lethal practice of national segregation and identity branding, to favour those deemed to belong and care less or nothing for those who don't. The categorical imperative implicitly negates this practice. It calls us to be cosmopolitan, to treat all humans as having equal moral status. It waits to dethrone the reign of national sovereignty and be installed as the ethically supreme or protective principle of world order. The categorical imperative opens the door for a new paradigm approach to constitution building. To date, expertly crafted paper constitutions and charters have bestowed us with rights while largely absolving us of the responsibility needed to fulfill them. As the Commission saw, this approach has seriously failed us. The imperative will instead have us focus on building our inner constitutions, on choosing the principles that will constitute our integrity, giving us a more trustworthy prospect for ensuring mutual protection and peace. The implications for education are radical. An education-led process of inner constitution building needs to be forged. If students are to undertake the global civic journey invoked by the categorical imperative, it will require educational leaders and mentors to undertake it first. The leaders will end up being those who take the lead. The Cosmopol project will call for them. The learning journey needs ethical safeguards. Habermas warns of a danger with Kant's imperative. If each decides their principles on their own, monologically, we risk having sociopaths like Hitler and Putin enact their self-determined principles reliably, murderously, with integrity. Hence, argues Habermas, we should undertake the learning journey dialogically with unlike-minded others. He says, moreover, that our dialogue should be tempered by competent exercise of discourse ethics to safeguard against domination and fallacious reasoning. After completing my PhD, I ran a number of deliberation experiments with several groups to pursue agreement on a set of discourse ethical principles and procedures. The agreements became embodied in a draft meta-constitution for use in the preparatory phase of the online constitution building journey. To enable the journey, an experimental online world constitution building platform is in plan to offer dialogue partner finding, educational guidance, a public argument mapping facility for registering propositions and arguments, and regular updates on agreement building progress. A key tandem project will see the drafting of a declaration of cosmopolitan rights and responsibilities. It will serve as the centerpiece of a series of globally orchestrated declaration events to be enlivened with music concerts, recalling the We Are the World Life Aid events of the 80s. Aspiring world citizens will be encouraged to come out from their closets, as it were, and publicly declare the moral right to be globally impartial, not to belong to any sovereign nation, to renounce national allegiance, refuse to contribute to national military defences, to opt out of the UN system, and opt into cosmopolitan governance networks. The ensuing global controversy and debate will be vital to the project's success. A well-orchestrated, music-fueled uprising of integrity against the international military order might well succeed, finally, after top-down plans have failed to fully disarm the world and bring enduring peace. Thank you. That'll be my contribution.
Thank you so much, Dr. Richard. It was a wonderful presentation, and we have so much to think about. I think that global responsibility, global ethical responsibility is a great words, and this perspective of global responsibility should be incorporated in so many other themes, because it's very touching, and there is some emotionality behind. Like I think a few days ago, a playground in Ukraine was destroyed by Russian military. So a lot of children died, and like civilians. Where is the global responsibility? So it's a great. Those are great words. We need to think about global responsibility among people and government. So let's move on to the next speaker, Peter Davidse. He's a world citizen, and he's also a world federalist with over 30 years of experience in the movement on various levels and in different phases of his life. Peter Davidse lives in Paris since 2018 and is married to a French. He has a master's degree in macroeconomics with his thesis on the idea of Peter Kuistra on alleviating poverty by an additional basic income organized and distributed by the UN. He was the director of the WFM Netherlands from 1992 to 2000. So Peter, the floor is yours. Thank you so much. You're muted, Peter, sorry.
Yes. The topic is overcoming poverty, and in the view of going to world peace. Can we imagine world peace without overcoming poverty, with the hundreds of millions human beings living in poverty? It's difficult to imagine. What is poverty from a financial point of view? Mass poverty refers to a situation where a large portion of a country's population lives below the poverty line, often struggling to meet basic needs such as food, shelter, and healthcare. It usually implies severe inequality, where the disparity between the wealthy and the poor is wide, and large segments of the population are deprived of opportunities and resources. Where does poverty exist? North America and Europe have largely overcome mass poverty. In Asia, especially South Asia, still 9% of the population lives in extreme poverty, mainly in rural India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. Extreme poverty means living on maximum $2.15 a day. South America. Poverty and inequality remain major issues across the continent, but progress has made in some countries, like Chile and Uruguay. Africa still faces widespread poverty, with economic challenges, political instability, and infrastructural deficits contributing to slow progress. Around 35% to 45% of sub-Saharan Africa lives in extreme poverty. Oceania, Australia, and New Zealand have largely overcome mass poverty, but challenges remain in smaller Pacific Island nations. No continent has fully overcome poverty, but significant progress has been made in reducing it. And the question that I asked to ChatGPT, is capitalism or communism best in overcoming poverty? This answer is neither. A mixed system is preferred. We'll give some examples. China. Despite the famines, such as the Great Leap Forward under Mao Zedong, the communist socio-economic system lifted hundreds of millions out of poverty. In the opening and reform policy of Deng Xiaoping that introduced market-oriented policies was the turning point. In 1978, 88% of China's population lived in extreme poverty. In 2020, the government officially declared extreme poverty to be zero. How to go from 88% extreme poverty to 0% extreme poverty in 42 years. It came in evolutionary phases. Between 1980 and 2000, China became the factory of the world. Alongside this, industrial revolution, massive infrastructure projects were achieved. Child mortality dropped. The fertility rate dropped sharp due to the one-child policy. With their fine-grit network of social workers, specific measures to assist the poor, such as distribution of money as of 2010, resulted in the official declaration of the end of extreme poverty in China. Relative poverty in relation to others, is around 20% in urban areas and around 30% in rural areas. The example of the United States, a high-income country. In the early 20th century, about half of the population lived in poverty. That's estimated by historians. Overcrowded small houses and corrected rags were worn as clothes. Then the Great Depression came, which was counteracted by the New Deal policy by President Roosevelt. That was a government-influenced action in the free market economy. The first official poverty data were given in 1958, 22% of poverty. In 1964, the War on Poverty, or the Equal Opportunities Act by President Johnson, bore fruit significantly from as of 1970. Then about 15% lived in poverty. So that was a major drop of almost 10%. Today, about 10 to 20% of people in the US live in poverty. Most of it is relative poverty. The official poverty line is $31,000 for a family of 4. And absolute poverty still exists in the US, but is far less than the 10%. Russia, also a high-income country. While the Soviet Union significantly reduced mass poverty through state policies, economic inefficiencies prevented its complete eradication. In modern Russia, poverty remains a challenge, with significant improvements in urban centers, but persistent issues in rural regions and economically disadvantaged areas. Mass poverty has been overcome, but not fully. Living standards have improved compared to the immediate post-Soviet years, which caused a poverty shock. According to government statistics, around 11% still live in poverty, about the same percentage as in the US. In the Soviet Union, the state provided work and income for everybody and housing, and from that side it was secured. So both the communist system and the free market system succeeded in overcoming poverty. What can we, in the latter half of the last century and the early quarter of this century, what can we expect? World citizenship recognizes the principle of equality between all human beings. In history, we have taken great steps forward. Today, all men and women may vote, not only rich men and noble landowners. In ancient Greece, citizens owned slaves. In our era, it is normal for descendants of slaves to have active and passive voting rights. Poverty is no longer accepted as a reason for exclusion of political life. Inclusion and poverty elimination is an explicit policy aim. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 1 is poverty reduction. The projected impact by 2030. UN aims to lift hundreds of millions out of extreme poverty, but still 575 million will live in extreme poverty by 2030. The climate crisis and poverty are deeply connected, as climate change disproportionately affects the poorest and most vulnerable populations. The United Nations recognizes that climate change threatens to undo decades of poverty reduction efforts. It integrates climate action with poverty eradication strategies. Examples are the disaster resilient infrastructure, the Green Climate Fund, or mini-grid solar systems. Then I have a new thought on poverty, which is to see poverty from a state responsibility and to penalize states that have poverty. When you look at poverty as a crime, there's a hierarchy of crime. There's a will to kill a people, in its genocide. Example is Jews in the Nazi Empire with an industrial extermination system. Then there's the will to kill livelihood. Death is a collateral damage. Buffaloes in North America, a besieged city. Then there are economic sanctions in the hope that a revolt overturns the elite or external pressure changes. There's a collateral damage of another intent. For instance, the Bengali famine in World War II, or the Holodomor which replaced the ruling elite by a dictatorship of the people, and the Bengali food was used for the English military. And famines as a result of weak governments. That's Africa today. Aftermath of a natural catastrophe. West Bengali flood of 2024, 3 killed, 250,000 displaced persons. And then there's poverty as a result of the organization of society. I have no time to read other examples of poverty which are not financial, but I think we should evaluate today poverty as a state responsibility that should be punished. It's the state who is responsible for the poverty, not for the poor, but for the society around it. We have the production and distribution capacity, and we should use it.
Thank you so much, Peter. Thank you for sharing all your thoughts and ideas about how to overcome poverty. It's definitely a massive problem, and that's why perhaps it's the SDG #1 of the United Nations. So we should find ways to reduce poverty or to eliminate poverty globally. So,
Luiz, I hope that I gave the message that we have largely succeeded in overcoming poverty.
yes, we have progressed a lot. I totally agree with that. But as we know, the non-developed countries they are still struggling, especially in Africa, in the Latin American countries, and we are not going to have peace if we don't overcome poverty globally. It's just a comment on top of your amazing presentation, Peter. Yeah, so we need to find a way to reduce poverty in the non-developed countries as well, because with poverty, violence increase. So thank you so much, Peter, for your presentation. So that's the end of the guest speakers section. Thank you so much to Maja Groff, Daryl Le Cornu, Peter Davidse, and Richard Mochelle. Now we are going to open for some question and answers. If you have any, you can feel free to ask the guest speakers. Anybody with a question to the guest speakers? I'm gonna start by asking, I've got one question to Daryl Le Cornu, that he delivered an amazing presentation about abolishing nuclear weapons. I think it's a big concern nowadays, as well as other topics. So Daryl, I would like to ask, what are the most significant obstacles preventing global nuclear disarmament, and how they can be overcome, in your opinion?
Well, nuclear weapons are possessed by only 9 countries. Yet those 9 countries are not moving on it, but there's another 40 countries or so that are supporting those countries. And Australia is one of those countries that is part of the extended nuclear deterrence that covers NATO countries and Australia, South Korea, Japan, and so on. So the most significant obstacle is getting world leaders to see sense, and getting leaders of significant countries uh, more powerful countries to take this very seriously, as was done in the 1980s. So it's really, you could say on the other hand, it's building a movement and a global movement, and getting people around the world to push for that, as happened in the 1980s and earlier. But you don't need that to understand. The politicians understand. In Australia, there's many politicians, particularly in the Labor Party. Most of the Labor Party and the minor parties have signed a pledge supporting this treaty. They understand it. We don't need masses of people in the street for them to understand the issue. It's quite clear. And many politicians around the world are in the same position. So the obstacle is just, I guess, putting pressure on them so that they take some action. Yeah, that's about all I can say at the moment. There's more to it than that, obviously, but that's one.
Yeah. Okay. I agree. Chris, you've got your hands up.
Yes, I'd just like to comment. I guess maybe the speakers can reply to this. What we've heard is all about global problems, the major global problems we're facing. The question is, can we solve them all without a global government? I mean, I guess we all agree that we need a global government to deal with these global problems. How many of the problems can we solve short of that? Yeah, if we had a global government, we could systematically approach all these problems and solve them. But what can we do short of that? That's my question.
Any of the guest speakers could reply to Chris?
I can quickly reply, and then I need to drop off in a moment. But I mean, how do you define government, right? I would argue that we already have a global government of a sort, because after World War II and even previous to that, it was obvious that we needed much more significant management coordination mechanisms to tackle shared challenges. Just what we have in terms of international government is very weak and disjointed and has a whole set of flaws. It's not what the evolved systems we see at the national level of governing our common issues, common topics. So I think time will tell in terms of like deeper reforms. But for example, in the Climate Governance Commission report of late 2023, we mentioned Parliamentary Assembly proposals, reforming the Security Council, ensuring proper international rule of law, which are, steps forward that are already inherent in the current international system. But I do think like those discussions about the comprehensive international governance reform, sort of like core institutions and architecture, is extremely important, because I think that's still an open question. Can we solve the polycrisis issues without like a fundamental strengthening? And my suspicion is, yeah, we'll have to think very carefully, and any lucid, responsible decision makers across various countries, they know to protect their national sovereignty and autonomy and well-being, will have to get much more serious about our international governance mechanisms. So I think for me, the interesting question is, what key architectural reforms would help across the board, and then issue by issue also, even significant, bold new upgrades are probably in order.
Thank you so much, Maya. Someone else would like to make a question to one of our guest speakers? Yes, Richard?
There we go.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, the question of global government is poses such a so many answers, there's so many different options as to what a global government could look like. When people talk about it, it's almost as if there's only one kind of model in their minds, but there's so many options and still proposals to be created. It seems to me that things are going to have to get a lot worse before they get any better. I keep going back to the Commission on Global Governance's advice that sooner or later we, the citizens, need to be taking greater responsibility for what we're consenting to. And currently we're tacitly consenting to, a kind of tribal anarchic order, while there are laws, as Maja has pointed out, there are institutions that are operating as kind of mini global governments in their own functional areas. There's still the main problem of the sovereign nation state being the kind of the supreme system of governance that is going to remain only until the citizens revoke their consent. Most people don't think that the global governance arrangements that exist at the moment have any bearing upon their own consent, that their consent doesn't seem to apply. And it seems to me that, given the world system doesn't exist in the minds of the kangaroos out here or in the minds of the trees, they only exist in the minds of human beings. The world system is a human construct. And until we recognize that we're each complicit in that, until we recognize that we're each consenting to that, I really don't see that things are going to change. They'll really have to get much worse, perhaps, to shock people into taking some responsibility for their complicity. That's my sort of pessimistic response.
It is a bit pessimistic, but sorry, I'm suggesting, I guess, what you pointed to is we need a democratic system. We need a proper global parliament, basically, of some sort, to sort out these problems. How we get there is the $64 question. Okay, said my bit.
Okay, everyone. Again, thank you so much for the guest speakers, Peter Davidse, Richard Mochelle, Maja Groff, and Daryl Le Cornu. It was an amazing experience and an amazing gathering, I think. So much information, so much topics under the theme of ways to achieve global peace. Our ultimate goal is to have global peace, and that's what we are working for. We have different expertise like climate change, nuclear weapons, abolishment, overcoming poverty, global responsibility, and as I said, we are all going towards the same goal for peace and prosperity between people, and in a planet where people can live in harmony with nature. So thank you so much. This event is recorded. It will be uploaded on YouTube, on the World Citizens Australia Association of Australia YouTube channel, and on our website. It will be circulated between organizations, the WFM-IGP, ICANN Australia, ICANN International, and other organizations. So I'm gonna close the meeting, and I see you next time, and let's continue our journey to achieve global peace. Bye-bye.
Thanks for
Thank
organising.
you, Luiz. Yeah.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, everybody. It was
Very
great.
much.
Great to meet you all again.
Good night.
Have a look in the
Great
chat.
discussion. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.
Okay.